let's look at cruelty from a technical point of view. And so when someone acts cruelly, they are acting in a way that hurts another person. To be cruel is to hurt another person. And there's conscious cruelty, which we tend to think of a little bit more as opposed to, accidentally stepping on someone's toe. We don't tend to think of that as cruel. But if we allow, meaning if we ignore, if we willfully ignore information about the fact that people are coming back with bleeding feet as we send them barefoot into a room filled with nails, it becomes increasingly cruel to stay and do nothing, to not respond. One could even say that that level of willful ignorance is an additional form of cruelty, in the same way that when we expose children of veterans to veterans who have not received care in the healing of PTSD, when we expose children to parents with intergenerational abuse cycles, we could say that it is an additional form of cruelty, the cruelty of an 80% or higher chance of the disease migrating, the sexual abuse, the violence, the addiction, etc., migrating and infecting the new generation, while simultaneously ignoring and pretending that the data about that is not in, much as the U.S. military ignored the data on PTSD with returning Vietnamese veterans or Vietnam veterans, and instead left them to a statistical increase in suicide, addiction, in a whole host of different arenas, and a downward spiral. So cruelty equals hurting someone, and conscious cruelty is the willful ignoring of the data about that, and the intentional hurting of another. And so I want to look at the pattern of cruelty from the perspective of a virus, and why this virus wants to jump the gap from one person to another. Because one can just be cruel to oneself. And the first thing that I want to look at is this separation between individuals. So if you bring two individuals together, the more intimate the relationship, the more there tends to be a sense of unity. Meaning, the more you really get to know someone mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, etc., the more it becomes clear that we are the same, that we are part of a species together. Now, we do a lot in our culture with all of the traveling and moving to create the mythology of the stranger, where it seems like this famous person is somehow far removed, or this wealthy person is far removed, or this person in this country is completely different from this person in another country. But the reality is that when we spend time getting to know the deep thoughts, feelings, beliefs, etc., of different people, the more we feel a sense of oneness. We feel a transcendence that bridges the gap in our differences. And this happens most of all in marriage, where there is a symbolic unity. And one of the things that often happens in the courting and marriage dynamic is that when we fall in love across a crowded room, when we find ourselves attracted, often what we are attracted to is something that promises to answer certain deep-seated pains, to fulfill deep unmet needs, to bring more pleasure than pain, and that is other. This person is so wonderful, and my life is going to be so wonderful together because you are different than me, because you complete me. You are other. And this is the basis of the falling in love, the idea of falling in love with the other. And as long as the person is the other, there is a tendency to treat them better than we treat ourselves. So we might interrupt our own thoughts and say, oh, that was a dumb idea. What were you thinking? But when we're dealing with the other, the beautiful projected other, we would never do that. We might think, gosh, I'm, a little bit disgusting in this area, that area, or whatever. But the other is superior in some way. And so in this courting phase in relationship, in which they remain the distinction of the other, we treat them better than we treat ourselves. We cook better food. We go to better restaurants. We dress better for them because they are other. They are better than and other than some part in the self. However, with the ritual of marriage, with the language of marriage, and with the intimacy of proximity, the other dissolves and disappears. And instead, we discover that the other person is just like me. They're not better than me. They're just as crazy. They're just as weird. They're just as unreliable or unhelpful. And it may be different. It may be a different mix of problems and benefits, but what we discover is that they are not other. And in doing so, the treatment of what was the other deteriorates to the level of treatment that we treat ourselves. So if we're feeling impatient and hostile towards ourselves, and then the other, the partner, the spouse, starts to behave similarly to the way we're behaving, then we will tend to feel impatient and hostile towards them. And what this basically means is that in a long-term intimate relationship, it is impossible to treat the other more hospitably than we treat ourselves. In a long-term intimate relationship, where we are seen, where we are known and we know, it is impossible to have this double standard. And so what we do then is we externalize the internal relationship between different masculine and feminine components within ourselves, different masculine and feminine personas, into the outer relationship, where now we behave in this way that we relate in the inner dialogue towards the other. Now, if this doesn't fit well on some level, then the relationship breaks apart. We say, no, you may treat yourself that way, but you don't get to treat me that way because I treat myself better. In that sense, there can be a dissonance and the relationship will fall apart. But there is a tendency in human nature towards equality. And so, how cruelty comes in, and most of us have been subjected to a whole barrage of cruelty on different dimensions and in different times in our life. And so we have this reservoir. We have this reservoir of hurt, of pain. And with that reservoir of hurt and pain, we are more impatient. We are more sarcastic. We are more bitter. We are more angry. We are more hostile. We're more disappointed. We're more depressed. We have more rage, etc. So with this reservoir of pain, we have these different ways of masking, of processing the pain. Anger, impatience, judgments to numb, self-pity to numb, superiority to numb, superiority to attack, inferiority to attack or to protect. There's a whole host of different things that we do to accommodate, to cope with this pain, with this hurt on some level. But in this interesting dynamic, much like the typical individual who will clean the house for the guest. It's fine, there's dishes in the sink, it's fine, there's stuff in the car seat, etc. But company is coming over, we're going to pick someone up at the airport, so the house has to be cleaned and the car has to be made presentable for the guest, for the other. And so there is a willpower and this sense that the other is more valuable than oneself. And this wall of will can be maintained for a certain period of time. The longer you are together, the longer you are in intimate proximity, the harder it is and the less likely it is that this reservoir of pain that's back here will be kept in check so as not to go on to the other person. Because if the wall of will comes down, then the pain, etc., will equalize. Because water wants to be equal. And it takes energy to create and sustain an inequity. And so that's an important part in understanding cruelty, that cruelty comes in and it builds up in pain, and it expresses itself in various masks of pain: impatience, addiction, self-sabotage, cutting oneself, cursing oneself, all of these different masks of pain. And it forms an intensity, a threshold, a layer, a reservoir. And that we're polite to new people and strangers, and we know how to treat the world as a stranger better than we treat ourselves. We say we're doing fine, we put on an effort to a smile, etc. But as I say, over time, it becomes, if we're living together, if we're married and I'm feeling miserable, etc., why should I be focusing on you feeling nice when I feel miserable? And so the level tends to equal out. If my wife is too cheerful and I'm feeling really rotten and I can't get out of the rotten feeling for whatever reason, it's not long before I find some reason to be irritated with something that she's doing that knocks her down and simultaneously lifts some of the load. Because now I have to spend less willpower fighting, if I think about a cutting remark and then I spend willpower to not say the cutting remark, I'm spending energy to hold that water back. It's like there's pain there, there's energy there, and it wants to roll out and wants to roll into the relationship. But I'm saying, no, that's rude, no, but I'm not able to stop the inner pain, the inner abuse cycle, where I'm still feeling, so in my thoughts around myself, this abuse cycle is continuing, but I'm only stopping the articulation, the verbal speaking to the other. In this dynamic, if we have a low water down here and a high water up here, if I remove the willpower gateway and just let things flow, the water level will equalize, where her pain will go up, my pain will go down, and it takes no energy to sustain the distinction between us. Now, there's an equality and a conservation of energy. Now, there's also there's also a desire to break down the other person's wall. So, for example, if I'm feeling high pain and high anxiety and high fear, and I look around, and particularly if I'm seeing that the reason that I'm carrying that higher level and that my wife is enjoying her life so much is that I'm paying all the bills and I'm worrying about the taxes and I'm negotiating the lease and I'm making sure the car runs properly. And so, in other words, the reason my pain threshold is higher is that I'm carrying a heavier load for both of us, one. Two, that the other reason the pain threshold is higher is that has a wall of her own. She's self-absorbed. She's focused on her clay modeling, her drawings, her little garden project that's fun for her, and she's not noticing either the imbalance in the relationship or its impact on me. In other words, I'm in pain both because I'm doing more and because she's not noticing the imbalance, and because she's not noticing the strain and the pain, and because she's not motivated to do something about it. In other words, she has a narcissistic bubble of her own that says, well, it's perfectly fine that my husband's in pain and all this because I'm having a lovely time. And so there is the wall in the part of me that's saying, I want to be this great guy. I want to, be this loving husband. I want to treat my wife well. And there is a wall of obliviousness and a wall of self-centeredness, which together are leading me to have most of the pain. So there's an elevated level of pain because I'm responsible for both people rather than just one. And it's not being attended to in some way, either by me, because I'm trying to be a great guy, or by her, because she's oblivious. This this dynamic is one that ultimately strikes me as unjust. I get more angry. Why aren't you paying attention? Why is it okay with you that I'm doing all this and you're not? Why is that okay? And so that penetrates the self-absorption. Because, of course, when I'm angry and interrupting the flower puttering or whatever it is, now I've pierced her bubble of dissociation. So there's my bubble of dissociation, which I'm going to carry all this burden, etc., for us, and that whole kind of dynamic of love as martyr. And then there's and I'm not saying that martyr is loving. I'm just saying there's a mythology starting with, God sent his only son to be nailed to the cross for you, out of love. And then Jesus, willingly hung there bleeding to death for his love for you. There's the connection in the mythology of suffering and love, of sacrifice and love. And so these two walls, the self-centeredness and the martyr, the sacrifice, etc., maintain this gap until it's unbearable, until it's like, fuck this. I'm not going to sit around paying all these bills, doing all these things, this and that and the other, so that you can be completely oblivious of me. No, you're going to hurt too. And so there's a transference of the load till it equals out. And this is an interesting dynamic because if you look at it as a viral and scientific, nature, one of the things that it suggests is that if one party in the relationship is chronically suffering, both parties have a design flaw. That in some ways, for example, if you're backpacking in the mountain and you have the protocol that one person carries all of the backpacks for everyone and the other people walk around and enjoy themselves. And then the person who's carrying all the backpacks, can't move or collapses or falls off a cliff because it's too much weight for one person. It suggests that if there is a backpacking adventure that requires, 200 pounds of supplies, that one of the best ways to have a sustainable group is to equally divide up the weight of the backpack between the different people, or to do it by body weight. So if you're going to, be a 200-pound, muscle person, you're going to need more water, so you're going to carry more water, etc. So you can do it kind of proportional to body weight in that sensibility. And so this is suggesting that if a protocol, if a system generates a certain amount of pain, and you're working as a team, you want to share in the rewards and share in the pain equally. That there is a certain kind of instinctive justice around that there's also a certain kind of efficiency in physics around that. You're not going to maintain these two separate walls, but rather share in the gifts and in the suffering. And it's also important to understand that with technology, over time, effective technology, I should say, with intelligence over time, a system generates less and less suffering. So, what do I mean by that? We recently washed the windows, and in the old system, the window cleaners barged into the house and, made noise and took appointments and, cost $180 and then, all that. And that wasn't a great system. And then there was the system of my wife cleaning the windows and trying to get the upstairs windows by leaning out and stuff, and that wasn't a very good system. And so we bought this magnetic window cleaner where you strap it on the outside and you move the piece around on the inside and it cleans the windows on the outside. And so what that means is that it takes less time and less money and less pain, because there's no intrusion and schedule hassle and all that, for the same clean window. And so there's more time to nurture and grow and spend together, etc. And so the system gets a little bit better. And a little bit better, and then maybe next purchase is a robotic window cleaner where you just put it on the outside and it does its own thing, and move it on the inside, does its own thing, and you just plug it in, and then later they invent the battery version and all that. So this is an evolution in technology. You have a poor back and you realize you have a crooked neck, and then you're irritable the next day and you get a good sleep pillow. Now you don't have a crooked back. Now you're not irritable. Then you don't fight about little things and the system gets better. But within any system, within any human physical system, there is a certain amount of pain that is generated. And that pain is a representation of the gap between what we're wanting, what we're longing for, what we desire, and what is. So, I want to be able to move my arm, and I can't. So there's pain there. I want to be able to type, and I can't because my hand won't type at this angle. I want to be able to, and I can't. And so within this system of a broken elbow, there is a big gap between, just very simple things like dental flossing with two fingers and different hands. And so there's a gap. And that gap leads to pain. And the question is, how is that pain distributed? And it's distributed best when it is shared proportionally. That a given system is going to create a certain amount of well-being, a certain benefit, and it's going to create a certain amount of pain. And that this is shared. Because, for example, the washing machine that tumbled down the stairs, knocking me over, is our washing machine. And so if I take the risk and I spend the money to buy the washing machine and help move it into place and then get the new one when this one breaks falling down the stairs, then I need help doing these things. And so in a relationship where all of the rewards go to one person and all of the pain goes to another, it's not a sustainable relationship. Eventually, a self-loving person will leave such a relationship because, because pain will actually go down if you leave a narcissistic relationship like that. And so this is one part of the phenomena. Now the other, and a very important part, is what I would call a pressure loop. Now these are psychological wounds and psychological pains. And a pressure loop goes something like this. You're an idiot because you don't go and introduce yourself. You don't go and introduce yourself because you're an idiot. And the reason you're alone is because it's your fault and because you're an idiot. And you don't go and introduce yourself because you're an idiot. And you don't introduce yourself because you're afraid people will find out you're an idiot. and you're isolated because you don't introduce people. And the reason you're isolated is because you're an idiot. So basically, you've got a complete loop. This can go around endlessly and endlessly. And it creates a dynamic of shame. It creates a dynamic of pain. And there are these loops where, particularly in early childhood, when it's very difficult to fight a power structure, where when we're trying to assert something that's healthy and true, but we're getting punished by a giant. That's what adults are to children. They're giants. 3, 5 times the size, twice the size, controlling money, controlling time, controlling legal authority. They're giants. And so if you want to survive, you've got to make the giant happy. And if the giant is happy starting one of these loops and not getting any flack, then a kid will internalize the loop. The parent will say, "You're an idiot. Why don't you do this?" And then the child tries to say, "No, I'm not an idiot." And then the parent starts raging. So the child says, okay, I'm an idiot. And then one of these loops gets started. Well, these loops are just running in the background, creating pain after pain after pain after pain. And if they're unconscious, because some of these loops get started in facial expressions and impact before words, if these loops are unconscious, or we forgot about them, or we're told constantly in our culture, move on, move on. If we're in a pressure loop like this that is endless and unconscious, then it will create a steady supply of pain. And one of the interesting dynamics, when this pain is traumatic initially, is that an identity is actually a medicine to overwhelm and trauma. Because when we're overwhelmed in trauma, we don't know who we are, we lose all track of time, etc. It just feels overwhelming. And so we want to cling to some kind of an identity. And the identity we cling to is often the most familiar pain, the most familiar fear. And pain and fear both produce chemicals in the body that hide some of the numbness, etc. And so when we can get addicted to pain and fear, or addicted to shame as a steady supply of chemicals, and then just have a loop that continually supplies this little dose of pain and shame. So it's important to understand that this is one of the mechanisms that can ensure continual pain. And one could say that it is an act of cruelty to instill that in the child, consciously or otherwise, and that it is an act of cruelty in ourselves to leave these loops unmedicated, to leave these loops just spinning away, creating fear and pain, fear and pain, fear and shame, without intervening and breaking up the loop and saying, no, you were not an idiot for doing that. That was a good choice at the time. And you are not inherently an idiot. And I would like to have connections. And I'm going to connect in this way, and this way, and this way, and therefore I am not an idiot. And the thing breaks down. And that's a very important loop to pull apart. Now you need to become conscious of what these loops are, because they are pain factories. They are cruel, unconscious, continual chronic pain factories. And they often lead to incredible chronic physical pain because they're generating this in the body. And then the body often needs, whether it's alcohol or some drug or some sex or something, some compulsion to mask the pain. And then the addiction tends to grow and our lives deteriorate to feed the addiction. The addiction is not sacrificed to grow our lives and help, because we don't know how to heal these pains. So this is another part of cruelty that, in terms of how does this reservoir get this high to begin with, it's often these loops. And environments are influences. So if I have a part of me that feels worthless and then can get into a worthless loop, and I lose my job in a culture that says that your worth is determined by your job, then there's some part of me that feels worthless and can get into a worthless loop. And so getting a job may help to break that cycle. But the environment is just the influence, because there are other cultures and other individuals where you lose your job and it's like, who would have a job? It's like that story of the fisherman where an old guy is out by the beach casting a fishing line. And he goes out in his little boat and enjoys laying down and catching a few fish every day. And he comes back and he gives them to his family. And a business tourist, business owner comes by and says, look, you do this and you make a little money at the market. And imagine if you had a whole fleet of boats, and then you would do this and this and this and this and this. And, you know, and it boils down to, if you haven't heard the story, you know, why should I do that? Well, then you could do this. And why should I do that? Well, then you could do this. And why should you? And it's like, why should I do all of this? Well, so that you can retire and do what you want to do. And it's like, well, I'm already doing what I want to do. You know, I'm just going out and fishing every day. I have my peace and quiet. I have my beautiful landscape. I'm doing exactly what I want to do. Why should I work my ass off at some idiotic job I hate so that when I'm 65 I can go back to doing this? You know, I'm already doing it. And so you have cultures like that. But if you've grown up in a culture that's chasing money in whatever expedient way manageable or possible, you may not know that. So the environment can trigger these unconscious loops. There's also the fact, in terms of hurting people, is when you are stuck at a high pain threshold. So you're up around here, and nothing you've ever done has ever been able to bring the pain down to a nice low level. You're just up in high levels of pain. Then, you know, when you're in lots of pain, and particularly if other people are not, there is blame as an anesthetic. And so having someone to blame actually reduces the awareness of pain. The pain is still there. You still have a gap, but I want to be like this, but I'm not. So the pain is there. But when you blame, it's a distraction. So you don't feel the full intensity of the pain. And there's also can be if you feel powerless around pain. When you blame someone, there's a sense of power. You're at fault and I can make you feel bad, etc. And so there's this dynamic where blame will reduce the felt awareness of pain by some degree. So, and once you blame and say, well, you know, if you hadn't fed me alcohol at 2 years old, if you hadn't, beat me when I was 5 when I tried to tell you the truth, if you hadn't cheated on mom and ruined the family, if you hadn't left me feeling like a complete shit, I wouldn't be in so much pain. And I don't know how to get out. And if you had bothered to understand how much pain you were causing, and if you had helped me get out of it or left me some money that I could do therapy, you know, then I'd be free of pain. And so I'm going to blame you. And then another part of, you know, this dynamic of migrating pain is revenge. So revenge is also distracting, focusing, and empowering. Because what you're saying is, you hurt me, and I don't know how to get out of the hurt. You hurt me, and I don't know how to get out of the hurt. You know, you were rifle shooting, and You didn't pay attention that I was going behind the target. You didn't tell me you were rifle. I didn't even know you were shooting or that there was a target there. And I've got suddenly 3 bullets going in here. And because of these 3 bullets, I can't go to work. Because I can't go to work, I can't pay my bills. Because I can't pay my bills, everyone thinks I'm a loser. So now I've lost my health, my job, and everyone's thinking I'm a loser. And you did that by not telling me that there was a target range there, by missing the target, by just blowing off your gun. You did that to me. And then you walked away. It's like you said, oh, sorry, and then you walked away. But I felt like a loser for the last 3 years. You hurt me. And the hurt is bleeding out, and I'm in pain. And you're off shooting someone else, who isn't paying attention, or when you're not paying attention, and it doesn't bother you. Because I'm other. You're not treating me like yourself. And there's a certain irksomeness around this in humanity. It's like, what do you mean? You think you're better than me? You're the idiot who went and shot me. You think you're better than me? Give me a fucking break. And so where revenge comes in is this focus that I'm going to tell you through pain, 1, that you're not better than me. 2, that we are connected in more ways than you're owning. In other words, if you want to waltz in and ruin my life and leave me in a state of incompetence, that there's a connection. That's going to ruin your life as well. And so you have the revenge drive, but there's also a certain message of worthlessness and powerlessness. Why wasn't I worth noticing? Why wasn't it worth you saying, how could you help? Why wasn't I worth being retrained to a job I could do with 3 bullets in me or whatever it was? Why wasn't that worth it? And so there's a message of worthlessness that comes in. And when pain is transferred from within to without, then that message is, well, it's one of 2 things. Either I'm not worthless because I have power too. I can hurt you the way you hurt me. Or we're both worthless. So this gets into loneliness because when deep in the human psyche, one of our deepest fears is the fear of being alone and lonely forever. And there's nothing worse than imagining oneself in chronic high levels of pain, in a dysfunctional state, which you cannot figure out a rational way where you had much to do with it. You were 2 years old. You didn't ask to be beaten over the head with a beer bottle. You were 2. It's not like, gee, I was a clumsy 2-year-old, although many children do blame themselves for. No, this is not that kind of situation. And there's not that much you can do if someone shoots you in the back when you're walking down the street or something and then walks off. I mean, what's your preparation for that? That would say, okay, don't go in that neighborhood. Okay, I kind of follow along there, but what if that's the neighborhood you're born into and that's where your house is? It's like these are not easy things to fix. And so in that dynamic where another person effectively damages a great deal and then walks away, there's the sense of high level of pain. There's also the sense of I will be alone and lonely forever, particularly in a culture such as our own, where the person who's feeling the most pain is usually considered to be a loser on principle, meaning, you have wise Alex on Wall Street who will decimate a very good company as a corporate raider and then ruin a bunch of jobs and then go off with a bunch of money and have zero sense that that there's anything wrong with that. And people might call them a bit of a jerk, but also envy them and respect them for outwitting a company and ruining a bunch of jobs and making a few million. Now, in that kind of dynamic, there's then the sense of I'm now the one who's the loser. And that also fuels the sense of revenge, that I'm going to make, that jackass that ruined my company and I'm going to make them feel the same helplessness. And so this is another kind of motivation point where cruelty can happen. I also want to talk about unconsciousness in the cruelty pattern and crazy-making denials. Because if a parent is systematically cruel to an infant, to a child, and, as with me as an older brother, I remember one of my first memories, I'm like 4 or 5 years old, and I was making my sister laugh and then making her cry. And I was doing it from a rather dissociated place, and I kind of woke up seeing it. And I felt ashamed. But it was like I was completely unconscious doing it. And the question is, where does that come from? And it comes from sustained and chronic cruelty by parents that are not, they're unconscious of it. There's a lot of unconscious cruelty in our culture. Where, just things like driving around in cars. Bodies, infants, were not designed for billions of years to drive around in cars. So if they're shocked around at 1 year old and whatever, and the parent says, oh, it's a car. To the infant, it is a massive energy that may or may not be completely disrupting their regulating ability, etc. And it feels like this opportunity for where they should be bonding with mom. Mom's talking on the phone, etc., racing around in a car. And we're not attuning to the biology of a child. We're demanding that an ancient biological system switch its entire way of being within 100 years, which is a cruel act to the extent that it violates the needs of an infant's body. And that's just one of many, many, many examples, from diet to smoking to TV to the giving away of children to nannies and all of this and stuff. This is not how a chimpanzee relates to the world. So if you want to have a sense of what the childhood baby is most comfortable with, maybe watch a chimpanzee growing up with his mother, like, the Jane Goodall material. And then you look at the gap between that world and the world of many of our children, and you see that, it's thousands of % difference just because we've decided that's the thing to do in our cult, not because it's attuned to the body, not because we're understanding the infant experience. In most cases, we tune it out completely, and we don't learn to really connect with our infant, particularly pre-language. And so in this kind of unconsciousness, what's happening to one person in the infantile state and unconscious will tend to want to migrate out towards the other. There's one final kind of cruelty that I want to talk in terms of the loyalty of an infant to a parent. Now, if you are a mammal, like if you're a dog, Dogs can do this very, very well, which gives you a sense of how dissociative our culture is. See, if I go like this, or like this, or like that, a dog can track these little gestures intensely, and so can infants. They may not have words, but they have tonal and energetic and facial recognition. So if I say, hey, the child gets an impact of that. If I go like this, if I go like that, if I withdraw my presence every time a child asks for something and I withdraw, they get the message that asking for something is not welcome, that it's not safe. And so there's a whole range of infantile experience where we are training them with no awareness of what we're training them about, and that is a cruel act, when what we're training an infant to do is to lie or to suppress their communication of their needs because we withdraw or punish them or smother them or whatever, or to suppress their voice or to suppress certain feelings or certain truths because they watch us constantly to see how do we respond. And what an infant needs desperately is survival, security, love, and belonging, and acceptance. And so if the tightening, which are universal expressions even for a dog or whatever, is always given when they need certain things, they learn that those needs are not okay. Now, in this sense, if a child's healthiest part to learn to adapt and survive in an environment is used against it, to teach that child to behave in the most unhealthy way imaginable in order to be accepted and survive in our cult, in our environment, then this creates an incredible amount of unconscious cruelty because the child's survival instinct is now going into, teenage and adulthood, systematically doing things that are not good for it in order to be liked, in order to be accepted and feel safe from being rejected by the giants, by the cult, first the parents, then the school, and then the culture system. And when that training regime is complete, frozen, and unconscious, frozen meaning it's not changing because it's not conscious and nobody's talking about it, and it's really hurting the individual for a whole host of reasons, then we get into these dynamics of the different levels of pain that want to equalize, the pressure loops that will continuously create pain, and then it has to go somewhere. Once the balloon inside fills up, then it can pop or it can start dribbling out and being externalized to other people. That's just how viral energy spreads. And so turning something that is good into something that is destructive through the betrayal of trust, through the betrayal of leadership, through the unhealthy masculine taking the innocence, the vulnerability of a student. When a priest sexually molests a parishioner after the kid didn't want to go to church, but the parents said, no, this is the right thing to do. So the parent betrayed the child to the church, and then the parent didn't look in because the parent refused to look at the cruelty going on in the church. There's all kinds of cruelty in the church. Just look at the idea of sending your only son to be nailed to a cross. You don't think that's cruel? So there's all kinds of cruelty, when everyone agrees not to look, and the kid is exposed to that, and then 5% of the Catholic and perhaps other priests as well are then sexually abusing their children, and then the cruelty of not believing the child, and then the cruelty of prioritizing the priest's feelings over the child's feelings, and the cruelty of all that trust and innocence being actually twisted to harm a child in the most damaging way imaginable, particularly for young boys. Young boys who have been sexually abused by older men have a horrible set of statistics in terms of how likely that is to cause any number of problems at all levels of their lives. So when what is good, their trust, their belief in their parent, is turned around, you create enormous amounts of cruelty. And then when you have a willfully ignorant culture such as our own, where you don't get a questionnaire, did your priest do this? I mean, if we cared about children, and children can read and write by the time that they're 7, 8, whatever, why aren't they all getting anonymous questionnaires to find out how many priests are abusing what children and this and that and the other, coming yearly or every 6 months from the government? I mean, why not? Or from the community to say, we're taking a stand on this, that we're going to protect the child. And to not do that is a cruel act. So when we inflict cruelty on our young, and we fail to remove that cruelty, the cruelty becomes internalized and builds up. When it builds up, it will eventually spill out on others, as well as destroying, the self through addictions and things which try and deepen the cruelty inside.